Okay, I'll make that 10:30, so welcome everyone. I believe all Cabinet members are present, so there's no apologies to add today. So if we go on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Delith?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm not aware of any interest that need to be declared. The financial report is very general, but if members have any specific queries when this item or the other item is being discussed, you can then consider whether you have a personal interest at that time in relation to the matter that you've raised. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, all members happy with that? Great, we move on to item 4 then, is the confirmation of the Cabinet minutes from the 20th of November. Open those up. Check for the accuracy on any matters arising on page 1, or page 3 as it is on the page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11. Anything members want to add to those? All agreed as a true and accurate record. Item 5 then, updates on actions. Any updates? There's no outstanding actions on the sheet. Anything to add? Okay. Right, move swiftly then to item 6, which is service and financial planning, budget and service change activities for the forthcoming financial year 2019 to 20. Hand over to Nigel.
Thank you, Leader. This is the penultimate Cabinet report for the 2019-20 budget. Your final Cabinet consideration will obviously be in February. Section 4 of the report reminds Cabinet about the provisional settlement and then details the final settlement. As a result of quite a lot of local government lobbying, there was some significant and positive movement between the provisional and the final, and this is outlined, within the body of the report. However, I would say it's still a challenging settlement, and we're quite a long way short of any real terms increasing funding, welcome as the movement was. Some extra resource for social care, and it's pleasing to note that there's a recognition that investment in preventative services will help the overall situation, but I don't think there's enough consideration of funding on a health system basis as opposed to a health service basis. So I think we've still got a way to go on that. Paragraphs 4.3 then 4.5 take Cabinet through the policy steers that you've given to date, all the way through to the residual gap for services to address, which was 3.5 million. There's a table then at the top of page 26 which shows the target per service area, and then just a little way down that we have a table that sort of makes up how our mitigations are made up. So we've got a section on efficiencies and financial adjustments, which is about doing more for less, or things such as environments, which have very limited impact, and there's about £1 million of that. You've got restructure proposals within the overall mitigations. We've got some assumptions on grant funding, including some assumptions around what we would expect to get from regional health monies, and then a section on service provision change. And of the overall 3.5 million, only about 1.2 million is in that category. I would hope that, and looking at the mitigations, shows members that we tried to seek out efficiencies and different ways of doing things as a way to minimise the impact and not just go to service reductions. But until we start seeing real terms increases in funding, we're always going to be in a sort of contraction situation to create resource for investment. Paragraph 5.2 then takes you through the mitigations, along with Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, which details all the mitigations. They've all been subject of scrutiny last week, a very good session. I think it highlights the benefits of good and appropriate scrutiny. All members were engaged, or that was certainly my view on the evening. and a number of members have thanked officers for the way the scrutiny was run, in particular. So I think it's appropriate to thank everyone involved in that, particularly leadership team, colleagues, and the scrutiny team for putting that on, because it is an important part of the budget process. The report refers to the fact that the outcome of that was going to be verbally reported at this Cabinet and then formal consideration in February. So I'm going to hand over to Councillor Ashley at this point, who's going to outline the scrutiny recommendations.
Good morning, everybody. It's my first go at Cabinet, to be honest. Right, as Chair of the Council's Cross-Cutting Resources and Business Overall and Scrutiny Committee, that's a mouthful, I'd like to thank both the Cabinet and Chief Officers who presented of the Council's 1920 service and the financial plans for non-executive members last week. As Nigel said, it was I'm going slightly off the script here. It was a very rewarding thing, and it was a very long session, as Anthony can testify. I think it was 5 hours it was, but we managed to get it all done in one session, and everybody worked the socks off. That's me, that is. Anyway, following the lively scrutiny session, it says on the script here, the committee agreed to support the proposed budget mitigations and change activities subject to the following recommendations. And this is very well. In principle, members supported the budget proposal, reducing subsidy level at Cwmbran Farm, but requested the Council's Cleaner Communities Overall and Scrutiny Committee to undertake task and finish group at the earliest possible opportunity, looking at options for implementation. That will be tomorrow. That will be talked about. 2. Members supported the mitigation, reducing support to Glenavon Workmen's Hall, but recommended the implementation will be lengthened from 5 to 8 years. 3. Members were unable to support the removal of the grant to the 3 older persons forums. There was quite some discussion on that, I can assure you. And it says, on the other aspect, there's a number of comments and requests for seminars were also made by members as a result of the session. I will forward these to the leader and Nigel for their consideration using the agreed scrutiny protocols. In a nutshell, was what it was. We had a lot of discussion and it came down to that. Thank you.
Section, just concluding the report then, Section 7 takes Cabinet through the service planning and change activities. They're detailed in Appendix 3, as Councillor Ashley has referred to. They were also the subject of scrutiny, and I think this year we can collectively say we've made real progress in bringing service and financial planning together. We've had one scrutiny process on budget mitigations and service planning change activities, and in the past they've always been separate. The next steps in the budget are there in 8.1. Obviously, this council tax reduction scheme goes to council next week. We've got Cabinet on the 19th of February, which will consider council tax, T22, an updated medium-term financial plan, and then formal consideration for Cabinet of those scrutiny recommendations. So in conclusion, I mean, it's still a difficult budget. I think we continue to support the priorities, CP3 priorities. There doesn't seem to be any real end in sight in terms of the restraint on public funding, although it does seem within certainly the Welsh Government that the role of local government is starting to be recognised in the movement from provisional to final. The recommendations are in Section 10, and they are worded such that in approving the mitigations, you are approving them subject to any comments from scrutiny, so I think you can take it as read that those recommendations will be considered. The scrutiny recommendations that affect the mitigations, you would not be approving until you've considered them in February, because you're approving the ones subject to those comments.
Okay, thank you, Nigel, and I'd like to thank at this point the officers, including yourself, Dave Lilly, and the other officers in the Council for the work they've done to get us to this point, because this obviously is the latest in a year-round reporting process, building to Budget Council next month. thank you for mentioning the lobbying efforts that have been going on with Welsh Government and beyond. They have been intense this year. They have been frustrating at times, but I think we have made real progress. The budget this year is still a challenge, but I think we're getting somewhere in convincing, as you say, Welsh Government of the vital role that local government plays in the key preventative services. You know, we run education and social care, and they're two vital preventative services. We run housing, that's another vital preventative service. And if the Welsh Government believe in the principles of the Future Generations Act, which is about looking long term, looking at prevention rather than cure, then fair funding for local government is going to be key in that. I'd like to thank Stuart for coming along this morning, and to thank Scrutiny for the way they approached looking at the budget last week. I think as a Cabinet, I propose that we're more than happy to look at the recommendations that they've come back to us, and so that we can report back to Cabinet next month. I think they're all very fair recommendations. They showed they've looked at things in a considered and contextually appropriate way. On the farm, the Clean Road and Scrutiny Task and Finish idea is certainly something I believe we can consider. On Blenavon Workman's Hall, I think we're happy to go away and talk to the Hall and to see what's best to do on that particular issue. On the Elder People's Forums reduction, that's a fair suggestion that we can try and take forward. And on the request for seminars, certainly as leader, I'll be more than happy to look at seminars on issues like T22 and some of the issues that were raised in that scrutiny session. And I'd be more than happy to meet with Councillor Ashley to maybe look at the programme going forward so that we can build some of those things in to the sort of diary of seminars coming up. It was a good session. I think these sessions are sort of, the whole process is iterative in that we sort of look together about how it went last year and try and improve on it next year, and that's something we try and do every year. I think the idea of scrutiny members and officers of having the facilitators on the tables helped have a good discussion this year. The number of members that attended, I think, is worthy of commendation. You know, almost all the non-cabinet members attended and made an active contribution as part of those sessions. So I'd like to thank members, because I know this is, as leader, I recognise this is not an easy situation for councillors to get involved in. None of us got involved in local government to look at making, you know, reductions, cuts, mitigations, whatever you call them. So it's an easy thing, I guess, for some members who don't have the joys of my position maybe to duck out from and to not engage in, but our members don't take that approach. They engage constructively with the issues. So I'd like to thank the officers who were involved in that as well as the members. As you say, it was a 5-hour session, so no one scrimped on it at all. No, everyone, I think, gave it their full and undivided attention, and that was encouraging to see, because although it might be convenient for someone in my position for these things to be brushed over, I don't think that's how we should work as a council, so that really is appreciated from where I sit. One thing as well that has come up in the discussions is maybe the need for a bit more clear information across local government about where our funding comes from and what the money is spent on, in more sort of layperson's terms. I think that's something that I can maybe work to draw up before Budget Council. I think there's lots of myths and misinformation that goes round about, you know, where the money for local services come from and what local government spends its money on. That's something I tried to cut out in our debates with Welsh Government this year leading up to the settlement. Sometimes I felt before that money for the NHS was dressed up in terms of money for doctors and nurses and for patients in hospital wards, whereas money for local government was money for bureaucracies. It's not money for bureaucracies, it's money to run things like social care, it's money to run schools, it's money to run cleaning and greening services and the things in communities that people rely on. So more money for local government isn't me with my Oliver Twist style begging bowl asking for more, it's asking for more to fund vital services that people rely on. And I think that's worth pointing out in everything we do, and perhaps before Council I can work to draw something up that will at least illustrate that for people, whatever their views on the decisions that we have to make. Those decisions are tough, inevitably. £8.5 million gap that we drew up in early autumn this year. That's the gap between the amount of money we think we're going to have next year, and the amount of money on first indication that chief officers believe that we need to run the core services of the council. That's not the money that we would like to be able to spend, that's just the money to deliver, a standstill service, so to speak. That really illustrates the scale of the challenge, especially when it comes after 8 years of similar gaps. We're up around the £50-something million mark, money that we've had to save since the beginning of the decade now. So it's again the result of a real terms cut in funding, £1 billion less for the Welsh Government to spend than at the beginning of the decade. That, added to the fact that they've decided to prioritise the NHS in Wales, means that we've got large real terms funding cuts to deal with. I think our funding's down over 20% in real terms since 2010. So that means that tough choices are inevitable. And again, I say, none of us got into local government to make savings, to make cuts. We got into it to try and boost local services, but we do have a duty to try and balance the budget as best we can. And that's a duty I think all of us as members of this council take seriously. Obviously there's different ways of bridging that gap. There's income and there's savings, and as Nigel said, we've tried to look at efficiencies wherever possible, but those alone are never going to be enough in the 9th year of austerity, so those tough decisions really are inevitable. One of those tough decisions, of course, is council tax, which we'll debate in council next month. Getting that right balance between savings and cuts is vital. Those who would call for a council tax freeze, however, would have to explain how they're going to save nearly £2.5 million more on top of the savings that we've already made. And my view is that a council tax freeze in the current conditions would lead to a large number of job losses in areas like social care and education that just aren't acceptable in terms of running a safe and positive service going forward. It really is the result of austerity, the result of the UK government pulling out of its responsibility to fund public services properly, and we're left in the hole to try and make up the gap. If I come on now, before finishing, just to some key decisions that we've made as a cabinet to try and approach this budget, because they are really the I hate to use the phrase at the moment, but red lines that we've tried to stick to in setting this budget. On schools, we made an early decision to give schools a cash positive settlement, despite the difficulties in our own budget. I think that's right. I don't think for a second that it makes it easy for school governing bodies to set budgets, but I do think it's us doing our best to try and help them out. If we'd have stuck to a cash flat or negative situation for schools, I really think that would have led to far too many teaching staff and other support staff that help run our schools being made redundant. One of our key priorities in our corporate plan is education attainment, and I believe that attainment is made off the backs of the work of those people. So I would hate to lose too many of them, and I believe that the fact that we've given schools a cash positive settlement in this budget is part of us trying to do our best by those people who make a difference to the education of our young people. On social care, this perhaps is the crux that the whole budget hangs on. Throughout Britain, children's services, especially departments, and adult services in many cases, demand rises, have ever more demands that they're trying to meet with less and less funding. I think the balance there is key. If you don't expect those departments to make any efficiency savings at all, you risk crippling the rest of the council's budget. If you try and make them make too many savings, you risk an unsafe service for some of the most vulnerable young and old people in our communities. We've tried to strike that right balance, and I believe this budget does strike that balance of, yes, requesting efficiencies from social care, but also funding the services that the most vulnerable people in our communities rely on. So that's the balance there. I'd also invite members to note the things that we haven't made savings or cuts in. Cleaning and greening services, for example. Again, we're trying to put our money where our mouth is in terms of the corporate priorities of this council. We were one of only 3 councils in Wales last year not to make savings in those sort of services, and that's something we're trying to voice as a priority. We've also tried to avoid false economies wherever possible. Delayed transfers of care is one example of a saying we've not tried to make, because we believe that would just shunt a problem onto another part of the public sector, and that would be a false economy. I would like to welcome the progress that Nigel's made on bringing together service and financial planning together. I think the documents that have been produced that are appendices, I believe, to this report are real evidence of that sort of process working hand in hand. We can't have a budget process on one hand and a service planning process on the other hand. The two need to be informed by each other and speak to each other. I think that's very welcome, and thank you to the officers who've done that, because I know that's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to produce reports like that, so thank you. On T22, I look forward to really getting our teeth into that work. For those who aren't aware, that's the T just stands for Torvine 2022. What we want council services to look like in 3.5, 4 years' time now. How we want to face the challenges of the future together. I have to say, whatever the challenges of the future, I sincerely hope, and I say this, every year, with hope that it'll be the last time I say it, but we really do need an end to the constant drain of austerity on the funding of public services. There is no future for public services as we know them if austerity continues into a 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th year. Services as we know them will start to disintegrate. We've seen it across the border in England, where many services have started to disintegrate, and I believe we as a council don't want to see a future where services are diminished and where services are just handed over to the private sector to run. I think that wouldn't have a good impact on our local economy. It wouldn't have a good impact on those who rely on the services most. So I'd like to thank everyone who's been a part of this process so far. I look forward to further discussions in Cabinet next month as we bring back the recommendations from scrutiny, and in Council as we look to set the final budget. Anyone got any questions for myself or for Nigel at this point? Okay, if I can bring you to the recommendations then at the bottom of the report. The recommendations are that, firstly, the budget position as outlined in the report is noted, that the specific budget proposals outlined in paragraph 5 and the detailed mitigations in appendices 1 and 2 are approved for recommendation to Council, subject to any scrutiny comments, and thirdly, that the service planning position and change activities are noted. Can I have a show of hands in favour? That's carried, and thank you, Nigel. If we move on then to agenda item 7, that's the insurance premium tender exercise. And can I bring in Wendy Edwards to introduce this report?
Thank you, Peter. Sorry about my voice, just getting over a cold. So this report, the purpose of this report is to seek your approval to award contracts for insurance policy premiums. The existing long-term agreements which we have in place expire on the 31st of March. So a full tender exercise has been undertaken, and the results of this exercise are presented in section 5, and I'll take you through these. The reason I'm here is the value of the contracts over 5 years require your decision. So in conjunction with Marsh, which is the Council's insurance brokers, the insurance unit, we maintain a comprehensive schedule for insurance, which is aimed to protect the Council against unforeseen losses and liability claims. It involves a degree of self-insurance, but a significant amount of the risk is transferred to insurers through insurance policies. And obviously, in conjunction with contract standing orders, the insurance policies are tendered at regular intervals. The one difference with insurance, though, is we can't enter into firm long-term contracts on price, but what we can do is enter into long-term agreements, which allows us to have an amount of stability, and we don't have to retender every year. Like I said, all the long-term agreements expire on the 31st of March. So in order to do the tender exercise, we undertook a mini competition under the National Procurement Service Framework for insurance services, and all insurance providers on that framework were invited to tender. To obtain the best responses from the market, we decided to split the tenders into 7 lots, which are listed in 5.2. Formal offers were received from 6 different tenderers, but not all tenderers responded to all the lots. The evaluation criteria we used was 50% on price and 50% on quality. And tenderers were specifically asked to submit tenders for lots on a 3-year long-term agreement with the option to extend for 2 years. In applying the evaluation scoring, the tenders with the highest score won the lot. There were 2 exceptions to this, which are denoted by a star, and this is where we awarded the lot based on a packaged discount, which was allowed under the invitation to tender with these insurers. So table 5.6 shows the winning tenderers for each of the lots. And in table 5.7, this shows the first year financial implications of that contract, which is $795,000. In addition to this, there will be 12% insurance premium tax and claims handling costs of nearly £10,000 for lot 3, which is combined liability. The total value of the contracts over 5 years on the declarations that we've made for this tender exercise is estimated at nearly £4 million, which is why we need your decision to award. The costs in years 2 to 5 will vary because with insurance every year we have to make declarations on the number of employees, sums insured for value for vehicles and buildings, etc. So they can vary slightly from year to year. I've consulted with all relevant officers in writing this report. And in conclusion then, really, I'd just like your approval to award the tenders as per table 5.6.
Okay, thank you. Anyone got any questions at this point? Well, thank you for the report. Obviously, matters like this can seem sort of academic, but obviously every pound we save on things like this is a pound we can spend on services. So your efforts in getting this to to the stage it's at now are very much appreciated. So can we take recommendation then at 12.1 that Cabinet awards the contracts for the insurance policy premium to tenderers 1, 2 and 3 as per table 5.6 at a total cost of £795,009. Show of hands in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. I believe that brings Cabinet to a close.